The sun did not shine warmly on the day Mary turned 11. It simply beat down, impartial to the sudden stillness that had claimed her world. The wreckage on the highway had taken both her mother and her father in a single breath, leaving Mary standing in the center of a life that no longer belonged to her. Her father's brother, Uncle Thomas, was a soft-spoken man whose hands were calloused from hard labor and whose heart was kind, if entirely pliable. He took Mary in without hesitation. But the house she entered did not belong to Uncle Thomas. It belonged to Aunt Joyce. Aunt Joyce was a woman built of sharp angles and sharper grievances. She had 2 daughters, Thando, who was 13, and Zinhol, who was 12. When Mary moved into the house, bringing her single wooden trunk of belongings, Aunt Joyce looked at her not as a grieving child, but as an intruder who had dared to bring an extra appetite into a home that was already stretched thin. From that first week, Mary's childhood ended. While Thando and Zindel sat in the living room whispering about boys from school, Mary stood over a steaming tub of laundry, her 11-year-old hands red and raw from scrubbing lye soap into stubborn color stains. When the sun began to set, she moved straight to the kitchen, hauling heavy cast-iron pots onto the stove. "Why is Mary doing all the heavy lifting?" Uncle Thomas asked one evening, standing at the kitchen doorway as Mary struggled to lift a massive pot of porridge. "She's just 11, Joyce. She's a child. Where are our daughters? Why aren't they in here helping her?" Aunt Joyce didn't even look up from her knitting. Her needles clicked with furious precision. "I am doing that girl a favor," Joyce barked, her voice slicing through the thick steam of the kitchen. "Her mother spoiled her rotten. At 11, she knew nothing. I am preparing her for marriage. She is a female, Thomas. Soon enough, she'll have to take care of a husband and a household. How is she going to manage a home if she isn't properly trained here? Should I let her turn out useless?" "And what about Thando and Zinlo?" Thomas insisted, his voice rising in rare protest. "I don't see them lifting a finger. Are they not females? Are they not going to marry?" Aunt Joyce slammed her knitting down onto the table, her eyes flashing with venom. "Don't you dare raise your voice to me about your brother's child!" she shrieked. "Your brother died and dumped this burden on us. One more mouth to feed when we can barely keep our own children clothed. We have an extra stomach in this house, Thomas. She will earn her keep under my roof, or she can go find her parents in the ground." Uncle Thomas winced, looking at Mary with eyes full of helpless pity, before bowing his head and retreating into the dark hallway. Mary simply wiped her sweat-drenched forehead with the back of her wrist and returned to stirring the pot. Mornings were no better. Before dawn, Mary would wake to sweeping the yard and scrubbing the floors. Often, there was no time and no food left for her before the school bell rang. "Auntie," Mary whispered timidly one cold Tuesday morning, standing by the door with her cracked leather school bag. "Is there any bread left for me to take to school?" Aunt Joyce glanced at her from the kitchen table, where a plate of fried eggs sat in front of her daughters. "If you didn't cook anything for yourself, who do you expect to make it for you?" Joyce snapped. "Do you see a maid standing in this kitchen, Mary? Did your parents leave you a maid in their will? No, they left you with nothing. If you want to eat, you cook. If you don't cook, you starve. You don't have a servant here." So Mary went to school on an empty stomach, her uniform too small, her shoes thin-soled. Yet, despite the hunger gnawing at her ribs and the exhaustion in her bones, her mind remained bright. In the classroom, Mary soared. She scored top marks in mathematics. Her essays were read aloud by teachers, and her report cards were covered in glowing red ink that praised her brilliance. That brilliance, however, became her undoing. When Mary was 16, Uncle Thomas fell ill and passed away in his sleep. Whatever small shield Mary had left died with him. The cruelty of the house was unleashed fully. One afternoon, while Mary was frantically trying to clean the bedrooms, carry water from the well, and keep a pot of beef stew simmering for supper, the fire caught too hot. The meat charred, black smoke rising from the kitchen window. Aunt Joyce burst into the kitchen, hauled Mary out by her arm, and dragged her toward the front door. "You waste my food!" Joyce screamed, shoving Mary down the porch steps onto the hard earth. "You burn the meat I paid for?" "Auntie, please." Mary wept, her hands scraped against the dirt. "It was an accident. I was trying to—" "You sleep outside tonight," Joyce yelled, locking the heavy iron gate. Feel what real poverty feels like. You forget that you sleep in a warm house because of my mercy. If I hadn't taken you in out of the goodness of my heart, you'd be dying in the street. Mary spent that night shivering against the outer wall of the shed. The warm bed Joyce spoke of was nothing more than a thin, soiled foam sponge shoved into the corner of an unheated storage room. She wore hand-me-down dresses that Thando had stained years ago and used leftover scraps of soap her cousins discarded. The final blow came 3 weeks later. Mary's high school teacher, Mrs. Kumalo, bumped into Aunt Joyce at the local shop. "Ah, Mrs. Lamini," the teacher said warmly. "You must be so proud of Mary. She's the top student in her entire grade, a true genius. She will certainly get a full university scholarship." Aunt Joyce's jaw tightened, her heart darkening with bitter envy. Her own daughters, Thando and Zingel, were failing their classes, constantly reprimanded for laziness. That very afternoon, when Mary returned home, Joyce stood at the door with a stack of heavy chores. "You are done with school," Joyce announced coldly, snatched Mary's books from her hands, and threw them into the pit latrine. "Auntie, no! Please!" Mary gasped, tears streaming down her face. "School is all I have. You think you are better than my daughters?" Joyce spat, slapping Mary across the face. "You waste your time reading fancy books while my girls suffer? No more. You have work to do here." Joyce piled an impossible mountain of labor onto Mary, washing clothes by hand for the neighbors, to earn money for the house, chopping wood, boiling water, making it completely impossible for Mary to ever step foot in a classroom again. Cut off from school, Mary's only escape from the house was her daily errand to the local market. She would walk down the dusty road, carrying a heavy woven basket, her eyes fixed on the dirt beneath her worn sandals. Her posture stooped under the weight of her grief. Sitting by the market entrance, near an old iron pillar, was a man named Malcolm. He was unkempt, his hair matted and his clothes coated in layers of grime. Yet, beneath the dirt, there was an unmistakable stillness about him. He didn't yell or harass passers-by like the other beggars. He simply sat, looking at his own hands as if searching for something he had lost. Every time Mary walked past, Malcolm noticed her. He noticed that while other girls her age walked in groups, laughing and gossiping, Mary walked alone, carrying the sadness of 10 lives on her narrow shoulders. "Little sister," Malcolm called out softly one warm morning as she walked past. "Why is your shadow always heavier than the rest of you? What is wrong?" Mary paused, startled. She looked at the dirty man, then down at her basket. "There is nothing wrong, brother," Mary whispered politely, shaking her head. Reaching into her basket, she pulled out a warm, fat cake, bit of leftover dough she had fried for the family, placed it gently in his dirty palms. From that day on, a silent ritual was born. Whenever Mary went to the market, she brought something for Malcolm, sometimes a sandwich made from her own meager rations, sometimes an apple, sometimes a hot vet Coke. In return, Malcolm offered her the only thing he had, a kind eye, and a quiet, respectful nod that made Mary feel, if only for a second, like a human being. Then came the day Mary turned 18. Aunt Joyce decided she was entirely finished with her niece. The girl was an adult now. There was no legal obligation, no lingering shadow of Uncle Thomas to consider. That morning, Malcolm walked into Aunt Joyce's compound. He had cleaned his face as best he could with well water, though his clothes were still rags. Aunt Joyce came out onto the veranda, hands on her hips, her face twisted in disgust. "What do you want, beggar? Get out of my yard before I set the dogs on you!" Malcolm stood his ground, looking straight into Joyce's hard eyes. "I have come to ask for Mary," Malcolm said, his voice surprisingly firm and resonant. "One day, when I am capable, I want to marry her and make her my wife." Aunt Joyce stared at him for a second, and then burst into a harsh, cruel cackle that echoed off the brick walls. Thando and Zinel ran out onto the porch, joining their mother in mocking laughter. "You?" Joyce shrieked, clutching her stomach. "You want Mary? Oh, this is perfection. You deserve her, and she certainly deserves you. Two pathetic strays. Taking her will leave me with one less mouth to feed. Since her good-for-nothing uncle died and left her penniless, why wait for one day? Take her now!" "No, Auntie," Malcolm said calmly, bowing his head slightly. I want to be well off first. I don't want to drag Mary into my poverty. I just want your permission for the future. Permission? Joyce sneered. I don't want her in my house another hour. Take her for free. You don't even have to pay a single cent of lobola. Mary! Get out here! Mary hurried out of the kitchen, her hands damp from dishwater. Auntie? She asked softly. This mad beggar here is asking for your hand, Joyce scoffed, pointing a crooked finger at Malcolm. And I am giving you to him, right now. Pack your trash and get out. Auntie, please, Mary gasped, her hands trembling. I am too young. I am only 18. You are 18. You're a woman, Joyce shouted, stepping down from the porch and getting right into Mary's face. You are old enough to start your own family. Go and start your family under the bridge with Malcolm. I am done with you. Thindo smirked, crossing her arms. Go on, Mary, her cousin sneered. Go live under the bridge with your mad husband. You two really are made for each other. Your parents died and left you with nothing. My father died and left you with nothing. At least now you have a beggar to call a husband. Aunt Joyce went inside and reappeared a moment later, carrying 2 black garbage bags. She hurled them down the steps. They landed at Mary's feet with a dull thud, spilling out a few faded dresses and cracked shoes. I have taken care of you long enough, Joyce yelled, slamming the heavy wooden door shut. Get off my property! Tears spilled violently down Mary's cheeks. Malcolm knelt quietly in the dirt, gathered the black plastic bags, and tied them shut. He then turned to Mary, extending a large, rough hand. Come, Mary, he said gently. As they stepped out onto the main road, the sky darkened rapidly, as if mourning alongside her. Within minutes, a heavy downpour unleashed itself upon the town. The rain slammed into them, soaking their clothes, making Mary's threadbare dress cling to her cold skin. She walked beside Malcolm, sobbing so hard her chest heaved. I am a curse, Malcolm. Mary wept, her voice breaking against the sound of falling rain. I am a curse. My parents died when I was 11 because of me. I became a burden to my uncle. And now my aunt has dumped her burden onto you. You barely have enough to feed yourself, and now you have me. What are we going to do? Where are we going to live? I shouldn't even be alive, Malcolm. I shouldn't be alive. Malcolm stopped in the middle of the muddy path. He dropped the black bags into the dirt, turned to Mary, and pulled her into his arms. He hugged her with a strength that caught her by surprise, holding her tightly against his wet chest, shielding her head from the stinging rain. Mary, stop it, Malcolm said, his voice deep, steady, and fierce against the storm. Look at me. You are not a curse. Do you hear me? You are a blessing. Even if it is the last thing I do on this earth, I will take care of you. Everything will be fine. Trust me. He picked up the bags again, took her small, frozen hand, and led her through the dark streets until they reached the concrete underpass of the Grand Highway Bridge. It was loud, damp, and smelled of rust and cold earth. Other homeless figures were huddled in distant corners under ragged tarps. Malcolm led Mary to his small corner. He took a flat piece of dry cardboard, laid it down carefully, and covered it with a heavy, albeit stained blanket. Sit here, Malcolm whispered, wrapping the blanket around her shoulders. You are safe. Mary sat on the cardboard, shivering, her heart pounding, with fear as she watched the shadows of the other beggars in the dark. Malcolm did not sleep. He sat right beside her, his back against the cold concrete pillar, his eyes open, guarding her through the night. The convoy. When dawn broke, painting the sky in pale shades of gray, Mary opened her eyes to see Malcolm pacing back and forth near the edge of the bridge. Malcolm, she murmured, rubbing her tired eyes. He turned to her immediately. You're awake. Stay here, Mary. I am going to the market early to see what I can beg or trade for us to eat. Panic seized Mary. She glanced at the other beggars under the bridge, who were beginning to stir and stare at her. She scrambled to her feet, holding the dirty blanket around her shoulders. No, Mary said firmly, her voice shaking. I am not staying here alone. I'm coming with you. Mary, it's a long walk and you are tired. I don't care, she insisted. I am coming with you today. Together, they walked back to the bustling market. They sat near their usual spot near the main roadside. Malcolm held out his battered tin cup, while Mary sat quietly beside him, holding his spare coat over her knees. Around mid-morning, the rhythmic roar of powerful engines echoed down the boulevard. A sleek convoy of 3 massive, polished black SUVs glided down the street, their tinted windows gleaming under the bright sun. People at the market stopped to stare. Such wealth rarely passed through this side of town. Inside the middle SUV, an elderly man with pristine silver hair sat in the back seat. He was dressed in an impeccably tailored charcoal suit, his hands resting on a polished mahogany walking stick topped with a solid gold lion's head. His eyes were tired, carrying a deep, permanent grief. As the car slowed down near the market intersection, the old man happened to look out his window. His eyes swept past the fruit stands, past the crowds, and landed on the beggar sitting by the iron pillar. The old man froze. His breath hitched in his throat. "Driver," the old man commanded, his voice sharp and trembling. "Turn the car around now." The driver glanced at the rearview mirror in confusion. "Sir, it's just the market crowds and beggars. We have a schedule to keep with the board." "I said turn the car around," the old man roared, his stick striking the floorboards. "Go back to that beggar. Turn around." The lead security vehicles hummed as the entire convoy executed a sharp U-turn, cutting through traffic and pulling up right to the curb, inches from where Malcolm and Mary sat. Mary gasped, terror shooting through her. She scrambled backward, clutching Malcolm's arm tightly. "Malcolm?" Mary whispered frantically. "What is happening? Why are those big black cars stopping in front of us?" Malcolm put a protective arm around her, his expression remarkably calm. "Just wait, Mary. Stay behind me. It's probably some politicians or celebrities making a public visit. They come through here sometimes." The side door of the middle SUV slid open automatically. A tall, elderly man stepped out onto the dusty pavement. His silver hair caught the light, his black tailored suit without a single speck of dust, his white shirt crisp. In his right hand, he held the golden-topped cane. He stepped toward the curb, looking down at Malcolm. The old man's hands began to shake violently. The gold head of his cane rattled against his fingers. He swallowed hard, his eyes scanning Malcolm's bloodshot eyes, his dirty face, his matted hair. "Malcolm," the old man whispered, his voice cracking with an unbearable weight of sorrow. "Malcolm." Malcolm raised his head, his face entirely blank, looking up at the rich stranger. He said nothing. Mary nudged Malcolm's side, her voice trembling. "Malcolm, do you know this man? Who is he?" Malcolm shook his head slowly. "No, I don't know him." The elderly man dropped his cane onto the dirt. He reached out with both hands, extending them toward Malcolm. Tears spilled freely from the old man's eyes, running down the deep lines of his face. "Malcolm, please," the old man sobbed, stepping closer. "Take my hand. Stand up." Hesitant, Malcolm looked at the man's shaking, clean hands, then down at his own dirty fingers. Slowly, Malcolm reached out and placed his hand in an old man's. The father pulled his son up. "You are my son, coming back to me after 2 years of searching." Malcolm hesitated, shaking his head, trying to remember. "Sir, I must apologize, but I'm not who you think I am. I'm just a man from the market." "No," the father insisted, his voice fierce with love. "You are my son. I've built a legacy for you. You could be dirty and covered in dust, but I would recognize you at a glance. You are Malcolm Vance." The father turned to Mary, frozen in shock. "Young lady, what's happened to him? Who are you?" Mary swallowed hard, struggling to remember. "My name is Mary. He is my husband now, but he has never talked about his past. He only remembers his name." The man stared at them both with a bated breath. "Please," the father begged, opening the door to his luxurious SUV. "Malcolm," Mary spoke softly, her voice tender yet clear. "He might be the answer you've been searching for. If you don't believe him, we can always go back to the bridge. Please, Malcolm." Malcolm looked down into Mary's eyes, searching for any signs of malice. "All right," he said quietly to her, "just because you ask." They climbed into the back of the SUV, sitting on soft, cream-colored, leather seats that felt plush compared to the cold, piercing air under the bridge. The heavy doors clicked shut, leaving the city behind as they glided smoothly down the highway. 15 minutes later, they stopped at a sprawling mansion entrance. A row of uniformed servers and housekeepers stood waiting. The driver rushed to open the doors. The man stepped out first, followed by Malcolm and Mary. The head housekeeper, an elderly woman in a crisp uniform, gasped, dropping her clipboard. Malcolm stepped onto the driveway, the housekeeper staring in disbelief. "Mr. Malcolm, is it really you?" "Yeah," she gasped, her hands flying to her mouth, tears instantly welling in her eyes. "Oh, sweet Lord above." "Greetings, Mr. Malcolm." The other servants bowed their heads, whispers of shock and joy echoing among them. "Greetings, Mr. Malcolm." "Welcome home, sir." They looked at him with profound recognition, entirely unbothered by his dirty rags and unkempt hair. Mary stood beside him, her hand tightly clasped in his, her heart hammering against her ribs. "Mrs. Mabel," the father spoke, his voice commanding yet warm as they entered the grand foyer with its high ceilings and crystal chandeliers. "Please have the kitchen staff prepare a lavish lunch for my son, his wife, and myself. Bring it to the grand dining room immediately." "Right away, Mr. Vance," the housekeeper said, rushing toward the kitchen. Mr. Vance led Malcolm and Mary into a warm, wood-paneled study filled with leather armchairs and walls of books. He motioned for them to sit, taking a seat across from them. "2 years ago, Malcolm," Mr. Vance began, his eyes fixed on his son, "you left this house on a major corporate business trip to Johannesburg. You were driving alone. You always preferred to drive yourself when you needed to think. But you never arrived at the meeting." Malcolm sat stiffly, his hands resting on his knees, listening as if listening to a story about a complete stranger. "Your car was found weeks later, abandoned near a ravine, completely stripped and burnt," Mr. Vance continued, his voice trembling. "No body was ever found. The police assumed the worst. They said you had been carjacked, beaten, and disposed of. The grief, it destroyed our family." The old man lowered his head, a single sob escaping his throat. "Your mother, Malcolm." She couldn't take it. Her heart broke into pieces. She spent every single day sitting by the front window, waiting for your car to drive through those gates. A year after you disappeared, Dot, she passed away in her sleep. She died of a broken heart. Malcolm flinched, a sharp, sudden pain shooting through his temples. But when he searched his mind, there were no images, only a cold, blank wall. "I never gave up," Mr. Vance whispered, looking up. "I spent millions. I hired private investigators, former military intelligence. None of them found a trace. You must have suffered severe head trauma during whatever happened to you, my boy. You lost your memory and wandered for miles until you ended up at that market." "Sir," Malcolm said, his voice quiet, filled with a deep, agonizing sorrow. I hear your words, but I feel nothing in here." He tapped his chest. "I don't remember a family. I don't remember this house. I don't even remember having a mother. The only thing I knew when I woke up in a hospital ditch 2 years ago was that my name was Malcolm. That is all I have." Mr. Vance stood up slowly, picking up his cane. "Come with me, both of you." He led them up a grand, sweeping staircase and down a quiet, carpeted hallway. Mary stepped into the room and gasped. It was vast, beautifully lit by floor-to-ceiling windows. On one side stood a king-sized bed with silk sheets. On the other, a private lounge with soft leather couches and a marble fireplace. "When your mother was alive," Mr. Vance explained, his voice thick with emotion, "she forbade anyone from changing a single thing in this room. She ordered the housekeepers to clean around your belongings, but leave every item exactly where you placed it before you left." Mr. Vance walked over to the grand, mahogany walk-in closet and pulled open the double doors. Inside hung rows of expensive, custom-tailored suits, crisp designer shirts, leather jackets, and silk ties. Below were rows of polished Italian leather shoes, and on a velvet display stand sat a collection of gold watches and signet rings. Malcolm walked slowly into the closet. His hand reached out, his rough, dirty fingers running over the smooth fabric of a charcoal suit jacket, the exact same fabric his father was wearing. He looked at a framed photograph sitting on the dresser. In the picture, a younger, well-groomed Malcolm stood with his arms around an elegant, smiling woman and the elderly man standing behind him. The reality of it hit Malcolm like a physical blow. The void in his mind collided with the overwhelming truth standing right in front of him. Large, hot tears began to spill from Malcolm's eyes. He sank to his knees on the plush carpet of the closet, burying his dirty face in his hands, his shoulders shaking with deep, racking sobs. "I don't remember her," Malcolm cried out, his voice raw with anguish. "I don't remember my own mother. I try so hard. I try so hard to pull something out of the dark, but there is nothing. God help me, I remember nothing." Mary immediately dropped to her knees beside him. She wrapped her arms around his shaking shoulders, pulling his head against her neck, holding him just as tightly as he had held her under the pouring rain the night before. "It's okay, Malcolm," Mary whispered into his ear, crying along with him, her lips pressing gently against his matted hair. "It's okay. You don't have to remember everything today. You are home now. You are safe, and I am right here with you." Mr. Vance stood at the doorway, watching the young woman hold his broken son. He saw the genuine, unselfish devotion in her eyes, a girl who had slept in the dirt with a beggar, willing to share his poverty, and now holding him in his wealth. Mr. Vance bowed his head, a soft, grateful smile finally breaking through his tears. "Freshen up, my children," the father said gently, closing the door softly to give them peace. "Take a warm bath, put on clean clothes, and rest. The dining room is waiting for you downstairs. We have all the time in the world to rebuild what was lost." A soft, hesitant knock echoed at the heavy mahogany door of Malcolm's suite. Mary walked over to open it. Standing in the doorway was Mrs. Mabel, her face beaming with warmth. Beside her was a sleek, rolling garment rail filled with an array of brand new women's clothes, vibrant silk dresses, crisp cotton blouses, elegant skirts, and fine shoes, all still carrying the fresh scent of high-end boutiques. In her hands, Mrs. Mabel held a leather vanity case packed with luxury soaps, oils, and cosmetics. "Madam Mary," Mrs. Mabel said respectfully, stepping into the room and positioning the rail neatly against the wall. "Mr. Vance ordered these brought up for you immediately. He sent a driver to the town's finest boutique the moment you arrived. Here are clean clothes for you to change into, and a bag of toiletries for your bath." Mary stared at the rack of beautiful garments, her mouth slightly open. For years, her wardrobe had consisted of stained, oversized hand-me-downs thrown at her in black trash bags. For me?" Mary whispered, her hand hovering over a soft silk dress, almost afraid that touching it would leave a smudge. "Yes, madam." Mrs. Mabel smiled gently, placing the vanity case on the dresser. "Everything in this room belongs to you and Mr. Malcolm now. Please take your time to freshen up. Lunch will be served downstairs in 20 minutes. After a long, warm bath, the first proper bath Mary had taken in years, she dressed in an elegant green blouse and a flowing navy skirt. Malcolm stepped out of the adjoining dressing room wearing a crisp, charcoal-tailored suit that fit his tall frame perfectly. Though his face still bore the shadow of confusion, the rags were gone. Standing in their place was a handsome, regal man. They walked downstairs hand in hand and took their seats at the long dining table. The meal was laid out in breathtaking abundance: roasted meats, fresh vegetables, warm savory bread, and rich soups. Yet, despite the feast, the atmosphere was quiet, heavy with an emotion that words could barely contain. Mr. Vance sat at the head of the table. He barely touched his plate. His eyes remained fixed on Malcolm, taking in every feature of his son's face, his heart aching with a bittersweet sting. "If only you were here, my love," Mr. Vance thought, his chest tightening as he remembered his late wife. "If only you had held on for just one more year, you would have seen our boy walk through those doors." Clearing his throat softly, Mr. Vance broke the silence. "Malcolm's son," the old man said, his voice steady and full of resolve. "I spoke with my personal assistant just a few moments ago. He is scheduling an appointment with the top neurologists and specialists in the country. We are going to have you thoroughly checked. If there is even the slightest chance to unlock your memories, we will pursue it." Mr. Vance turned his head toward the hallway and called out, "Mrs. Mabel!" The head housekeeper stepped into the dining room immediately. "Yes, Mr. Vance?" I want you to begin planning a grand dinner party for next weekend," Mr. Vance commanded, his voice ringing with pride. "Invite the press, our business partners, the family friends, and the community leaders. I want the entire world to know that the heir of the Vance family has finally returned home." "Right away, sir," Mrs. Maple replied, her face lighting up with absolute joy. Weeks turned into a whirlwind of restoration. Under the care of doctors, Malcolm's strength returned, and though his past remained a hazy fog, his natural elegance and intelligence began to shine through. But above all, his devotion to Mary only grew deeper. They decided to formalize their bond not under the cold steel of a highway bridge, but before God and the world. The date for their white wedding was set. On a bright Tuesday afternoon, 3 sleek black SUVs glided down the dusty, unpaved road leading to Aunt Joyce's compound. In the yard, Aunt Joyce was sweeping the dry dirt with an old straw broom, her face set in its usual bitter scowl. On the veranda, Thindo and Zinlo were sprawled out in plastic chairs, gossiping lazily and painting their fingernails with cheap red polish. The sudden, powerful hum of luxury engines made all 3 women jump. "What in the world?" Joyce muttered, dropping her broom against the wooden fence as the convoy pulled up, kicking up a light cloud of dust before coming to a smooth halt right inside her yard. Thindo stood up, her jaw dropping. "Mama, who is that? Is it government people?" Aunt Joyce gripped her chest, her heart hammering against her ribs. She watched in utter bewilderment as 3 tall drivers in dark suits stepped out of front cars and moved in unison toward the rear passenger door of the middle vehicle. One driver opened the door and bowed respectfully. A high-heeled shoe, polished and elegant, stepped down onto the red dirt. Aunt Joyce's eyes bulged so wide they looked ready to pop out of her sockets. She froze, her breath catching squarely in her throat. Thindo dropped her bottle of nail polish, watching it shatter on the concrete floor of the veranda. Mary stood tall in the sunlight. She wore a stunning pale blue dress accented with a crisp white collar that draped over her shoulders with regal grace. Her hair was styled in an intricate, flawless updo, her skin practically glowing, and her eyes bright with a calm, quiet confidence. She looked breathtaking, eloquent, powerful, and completely transformed. Before Joyce could even process the sight, Malcolm stepped out from the other, looking every bit the wealthy aristocrat he was. Aunt Joyce stood paralyzed, rubbing her eyes frantically with the back of her wrist, scratching at her eyelids as if trying to clear a hallucination. No, it can't be," Joyce stammered, her voice barely a whisper. "Mary?" Mary walked slowly toward the veranda, her high heels clicking softly against the earth. Malcolm walked beside her, his head held high, his presence imposing and calm. "Good afternoon, Auntie Joyce," Mary said, her voice smooth, poised, and utterly devoid of fear. She turned her eyes toward her cousins, who were cowering near the door. "Good afternoon, Thindo. Good afternoon, Zinhul." Aunt Joyce couldn't speak. Her lips trembled, her eyes darting, frantically from Mary's diamond-studded earrings to Malcolm's tailored suit, and finally to the row of black SUVs idling in her dusty yard. Is that? Joyce swallowed hard, her throat bone dry. "Is that the beggar?" Malcolm offered a polite, dignified nod, though his eyes remained cool and distant. "Good day, ma'am." Mary reached into a small designer handbag and pulled out a thick, cream-colored envelope. The invitation itself was a masterpiece, crafted from heavy, handmade parchment paper, bound with gold ribbon, and sealed with a raised wax crest. She stepped forward and placed the heavy invitation directly into Aunt Joyce's limp, calloused hand. "We came to bring you an invitation," Mary said softly, looking her aunt straight in the eyes without a single trace of hatred. Only a vast, unbridgeable distance. "Malcolm and I are having our white wedding in 3 weeks at the Vance estate. I thought it only right that I bring an invitation to my family." Aunt Joyce stared down at the gold lettering on the handmade paper. The marriage of Mary DeLemy and Malcolm Vance, at the Vance Manor and Country Club. Her hands shook so violently that the ribbon fluttered. Vance? The billionaire family from the city? Mary didn't answer the question. She simply smiled, a gentle, serene smile that said more than 1,000 loud words ever could. "We must be going now," Mary said gracefully, turning on her heel. "We have many more preparations to make." Malcolm offered his arm, and Mary took it with natural grace. They walked back to the middle SUV together. The driver held the door open, closing it with a soft, heavy thud once they were safely inside. The engines purred, and the 3 SUVs slowly turned around in the narrow compound, heading back out through the iron gate. Aunt Joyce, Thando, and Zenal stood like wooden statues on the veranda. As the cars drove away, the 3 women moved like mesmerized spirits, following the convoy to the edge of the gate, watching in stunned silence as the dust settled and the sleek black vehicles vanished into the main road. They stared at the empty road for a long, agonizing time. The girl they had starved, beaten, stripped of her education, and forced to sleep in the dirt, the orphan they had thrown out into a storm with black garbage bags, the niece they had forcibly given away to a filthy beggar under the bridge was now the future matriarch of one of the richest empires in the land. Aunt Joyce looked down at the gold-embossed paper in her trembling hands, her heart sinking into an abyss of unbearable, silent regret. 3 weeks later, the grounds of the Vance estate were transformed into something out of a fairy tale. A massive glass marquee sat upon the manicured lawns, draped in cascading white orchids, shimmering crystal chandeliers, and glowing fairy lights. The air smelled of fresh roses and rich perfume. High society figures, corporate titans, politicians, and news reporters filled the golden seats, their murmurs blending with the soft melodies of a live string quartet. Sitting near the back, feeling small, exposed, and entirely out of place, were Aunt Joyce, Thando, and Zenal. They wore their absolute best dresses, yet surrounded by ladies in silk gowns and diamond necklaces, Aunt Joyce felt as though her clothes were made of rough burlap. Every burst of laughter, every glass of vintage champagne poured by tuxedoed waiters, served as a burning reminder of the life she had tried to starve out of Mary. Then the trumpets sounded, and the grand glass doors swung open. A collective gasp echoed through the marquee. Mary walked down the white aisle on the arm of Mr. Vance. Her wedding gown was a masterpiece of pure ivory lace, sweeping behind her in a majestic train. She looked radiant, a queen stepping into her kingdom, and standing at the altar, looking regal, strong, and deeply in love, was Malcolm. When their eyes met, the rest of the world vanished. They exchanged vows not as 2 broken strays under a rainy bridge, but as 2 souls who had protected each other through the darkest night of their lives. As the grand reception wound down and guests drifted toward the outdoor fountains for fireworks, Aunt Joyce stood near the edge of the glass hall, clutching her handbag with trembling hands. Her heart was a chaotic storm of shame, jealousy, and profound regret. Mary, holding a glass of sparkling juice, stepped away from the crowd to catch her breath. Seeing her niece standing alone, Aunt Joyce swallowed her remaining pride and walked over, her eyes fixed on the floor. "Mary," Joyce's voice was cracked, barely audible over the soft jazz music. Mary turned smoothly, her expression calm and serene. "Auntie Joyce." Joyce couldn't hold Mary's gaze. Tears began to well in her tired eyes, spilling down her worn cheeks. I came to say," Joyce sobbed softly, wiping her cheeks with a trembling hand. "Mary, looking at all of this, looking at the woman you have become, my heart is breaking for what I did to you. I hated you because your mother gave you a soft heart," Joyce wept, falling to her knees right there on the polished marble floor. "I hated you because you were bright, because my own daughters were struggling, and because I was bitter at the world for being poor. I starved you. I worked you like a slave. I threw you out into the pouring rain with black plastic bags. I handed you to a beggar just to be cruel." Thando and Zenal rushed over, their faces pale with shame, kneeling beside their weeping mother. "I was the mad one, Mary," Joyce whispered, looking up through a haze of tears. "I was the one with a rotten heart. If you spent the rest of your life hating me or treating me like trash, I would deserve every bit of it. I am so sorry, my child. Please, forgive me." The room seemed to fall silent around them. Mary looked down at the woman who had made her childhood a living nightmare. She remembered the cold nights in the shed, the burnt pot of meat, the missed school days, and the stinging rain under the bridge. Slowly, Mary reached down. She took Aunt Joyce by her hands and pulled her up from the floor, wiping a tear from her aunt's face with her thumb. "Auntie," Mary said softly, her voice full of an extraordinary, unshakable grace. "If I kept the hatred you gave me, I would still be a prisoner in your house. Malcolm taught me that love heals what cruelty breaks. I don't hate you. I forgive you, Auntie Joyce. I forgive all of you." Aunt Joyce gasped, pulling Mary into a tight, desperate embrace, weeping onto her ivory bridal gown. Thando and Zinul wrapped their arms around them both, crying tears of profound relief and genuine shame. Malcolm stepped up beside Mary, placing a warm hand on his bride's waist. He offered Aunt Joyce a gentle, dignified nod, the final seal of peace over a painful past. Late that night, as the final fireworks exploded in gold and silver bursts across the dark sky, Malcolm and Mary stood on the balcony overlooking the vast estate. The rain from weeks ago was gone. The shadows of the market were behind them. Malcolm wrapped his arms around Mary from behind, resting his chin gently on her shoulder as the cool night breeze blew through her veil. "What are you thinking about, Mrs. Vance?" Malcolm whispered softly into her ear. Mary leaned back against his chest, listening to the strong, steady beat of his heart, the heart that had protected her under the bridge when they had nothing at all. "I'm thinking that I was never a curse." "Malcolm," Mary smiled, looking up at the shining stars. "I was just waiting for the storm to pass." Malcolm kissed her cheek softly. "The storm is over, my love. Forever." And together, hand in hand, they stepped into a future that was finally, truly theirs.